Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining the League of Women Voters, Northern Lower Michigan Public Forum on this lovely spring evening. I'm Robin Jordan, president of the League of Women Voters of Northern Lower Michigan, and I'd like to offer a few reminders as we start. Be sure to remain on mute for the duration of the presentation. It's also best to click on speaker view instead of gallery view so that you'll have a focus on each panelist as they present their topic. And as usual, this presentation is being recorded. It'll be made available on our YouTube channel, and we'll have a link on our webpage as well. Part of tonight's presentation includes a question and answer period at the end. We're going to ask you to please use the chat function to ask your question, and a moderator will read your question when we get to the Q&A section. You can write your question at any time, and they'll be read after the panelists have completed their segments. So for those of you unfamiliar with the League of Women Voters, we're a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support any political candidate or any political party. We do have positions on public policy, however, and these inform our advocacy and education work. We have public policy positions that support and promote environmental health, and in that thread, we're really pleased to offer this panel presentation on rain gardens, organized by our very active Environment and Natural Resources Committee. After tonight's forum presentation, we're going to have a brief member meeting, and I'll ask all members to stay on after the public segment of our forum. So our moderator for this evening is Pam Carpenter. She's our league member and advocate expert in rain gardens, and she'll introduce this evening's topic and speakers. Pam?
So good evening. Thank you for taking your dinner time to talk about a fun thing. Rain gardens. We have 3 subject matter experts. There's many in the Petoskey area, and I think that we got the creme of the creme. Noah from Tip of the Mitt has been with the Tip of the Mitt, I think, for about 2 years now, and his expertise is in green belts, rain gardens, and managing invasive species for the council. He's a conservationist. He was a conservationist with Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians, and his bachelor's degree is from Calvin College, and also a forestry degree from University of Florida. He's going to be sharing a lot of basic information about rain gardens and let you know what's available at the Tip of the Mitt. And our second speaker is Chris Leifson, and he has Michigan Service Garden as his business. He's been responsible for building and maintaining and creating many of the gardens that'll be on display in the self-guided tour later this summer. He'll be helping us with understanding plant selection and some of the do's and don'ts in creating a garden. And especially with native plants. You know, a lot of people are familiar with native plants and perennials, and we're just going to take it to the next step because those things are involved, but the rain garden also solves a big problem for many people. And then our third speaker is Lindsay Walker. If you don't know Lindsay, you probably haven't lived in Petoskey very long. And she's actually has a rain garden on Emmett Street, and she's taken time from a conference to be with us tonight. So she's going to give us some firsthand tips on what she's learned. You know, gardens do go through seasons, and if we have time, we even have some pictures of her gardens and a few others. Okay, I think that's it, and I'm ready to turn it over to Noah.
Okay, thank you, Pam. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I've got a few slides. Let's see here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. I wanted to start with a little bit of background about the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. We're a nonprofit organization that speaks for Northern Michigan's waters. And we do that through a combination of respected advocacy, innovative education, technically sound water quality monitoring, and thorough research and restoration actions. This is a map of our service area. We have a lot of beautiful and high quality waters in the area. I'm not going to say too much more about that, but I do want to acknowledge that we do work within the homelands of the Anishinaabe people, and we will continue to work with them to honor and protect this area for the next 7 generations. Okay, I'm going to be talking about stormwater tonight. The main reason that we create a rain garden as opposed to a different kind of garden is to help us deal with the problem of stormwater. So stormwater is just the water that falls as rain or snow and then melts or runs off across hard impervious surfaces in our developed landscape. And that includes things like roads, sidewalks, patios and walkways, rooftops, and any other of those hard surfaces. In an undeveloped setting, this water would soak into the ground, but in our developed setting with so many hard surfaces, this water runs off across the ground. And as it does so, it picks up various types of pollutants. So this includes things like eroded soils or sediments, excess nutrients from fertilizers or pet waste, bacteria and pathogens, oil, grease, other automotive fluids or harmful chemicals, and even heavy metals. And all of these things are running down into our streets, into the curbs, and flowing into our storm sewer systems. And then without hardly any filtration or cleaning at all, that stormwater is flowing right out into our lakes and streams. As you can see in the picture here on the left, this is a sewer outfall on Little Traverse Bay, right downtown here. On a typical residential lot like this, we have impervious surfaces that include rooftops here. We've got the driveway, there's the patios and walkways here, and even turf grass doesn't always absorb as much rainwater as we think it does, especially if the slope is steep or if we get a real heavy rain event. Some of that water is going to be running off across the ground and down into our storm drains. So what is the alternative to that? Well, one alternative is to create a rain garden. A rain garden basically is designed as a low place that you create in the yard, but the soils have good infiltration. And it is designed to gather the storm water that would flow into the storm sewers, and it's going to collect that water and allow it to infiltrate into the ground instead of flowing over the ground as runoff. So when it collects here in the rain garden and infiltrates into the ground, the plant roots are taking up some of the pollution, they're removing excess nutrients. There's microbes in the soil that are helping to clean that water. And we're also keeping that water out of the storm sewer. So we're not getting this big flush of water all at once into our lakes and streams. So that can help with local flood control too, if there's enough of these types of gardens in an area that can help reduce that flood as well. Additionally, rain gardens can help beautify our landscapes. They can provide habitat for pollinators and birds and other small animals. So there's really quite a lot of benefits to them. In terms of where you should locate a rain garden, they can be located in sunny places or shady places or anywhere in between, but you do want to keep them at least 10 feet away from your house or your foundation to protect that foundation. You also want to be sure never to locate your rain garden over a septic tank or drain field or other utilities. This is both because the plant roots can interfere with some of those things at times, like in a drain field. And also, if you have to have any repairs or other work done to your utilities and they're underneath your rain garden, the workers are going to tear up the rain garden to get to them. So you don't want that to happen. You also want to make sure that you have well-drained soils and that the bottom of the rain garden is at least 2 feet above the water table. And that's just so that the water that enters that rain garden, it's going to drain down into the soil and it needs somewhere to go. I also recommend typically avoiding steep slopes and areas around trees or under trees. You don't want to disturb the tree's roots as you're excavating that basin. And then finally, you want to plan for overflow. So if your rain garden fills to capacity and then you get a little more rain, it's going to overflow. So think about where that water is going to go. You can test how well your soil drains by doing a simple infiltration test. Basically, you want to dig a hole about 18 inches deep, fill that hole up with water and let it drain, then fill it up a second time and let it drain. And the second time, if that water drains completely within 24 hours, then you're good. You've got good infiltration capacity and you have good soils for a rain garden. If you don't pass that infiltration test, there's a couple of things you can do. One is you can add some amendments to your soil or replace the soil with a better draining soil, like a sandy soil. You can also put in an under drain that will help carry away some of the excess water. And the third thing you can do is to make your rain garden bigger. So just having a bigger rain garden will let that water that enters it for the same size rain will be shallower, and so it will drain faster. In terms of the size, you want to basically add up all the areas that are going to be draining into this rain garden. So in this example here, we've got a roof, a walkway, and a driveway that total up to 900 square feet that are going to be flowing into this rain garden. We divide that by the depth in inches, which in this case was designed to be 6 inches deep. And that tells us that we need a rain garden that's 150 square feet in size. Typically, the depths of rain gardens are about 4 to 12 inches deep, but that can vary a little bit. I'm not going to say too much about picking the plants because I know Chris is going to be talking about that, but just think about the fact that there's different sort of environments within the rain garden. So the bottom is going to be wetter, but the top is going to be about as dry as the rest of the yard, really. So it's not going to be really a wet place. And then there's going to be sort of transitional zones on the sides where your plants are going to need to be adapted to sort of that in-between conditions. Again, we really recommend native species. They have, especially with the deep roots that a lot of our native species have, really help the water to percolate into the ground and purify that water as it infiltrates into the soil. And you can also find examples of plants for rain gardens in this guide that we have on our website as well. In terms of the construction, you want to just lay out the boundaries of the garden, then excavate that basin that you'll need for the rain garden. If you need to, you can amend the soil with sand and other materials that will help it drain better, or you can put in the under drain if you need to. And then you're going to do your plants, install the plants. Generally, I recommend using some kind of mulch to help keep the weeds down and retain that soil moisture. And especially in the first year or two, you might need to water the plants to help them get established and also do the weeding. And of course, that's a cycle that you need to repeat periodically to maintain the rain garden. And that is pretty much all I have. So I will turn it back over to Pam or to Chris, whoever wants to take over from here.
I'm going to just ask you one question because we.
Hope you're back on mute, Pam.
Pam, you muted yourself.
So we finished a little early, so I'm going to ask a quick question of Noah. Do all rain gardens need to have rocks? Because that's something I wasn't really sure of when I first started looking into this.
They don't need to have rocks necessarily. So sometimes people like the look of rocks to use them as mulch. Using some stone, like if there's a concentrated flow of water that's entering your rain garden, where the water is coming in, the rocks can help break up that flow of water and help slow it down so that you're not getting erosion problems in the rain garden as well. So that's some of the reasons that you see stones in the rain garden a lot.
Got it.
Pam, I think that this is a question for me, really.
Good. That's a good segue. You're on.
Yeah, well, does a rain garden need stones? I think, yeah, it definitely needs stones, because when you create a swale that has really any depth at all, you create opportunities for erosion. And particularly where the water comes in, that area is usually covered in rocks to some degree, for like what Noah said, to slow down the flow of water as it comes into the garden. But also because right there where the water is coming in, it's a really concentrated flow, and you definitely don't want to have exposed soil right there, because it's just going to wash away into the garden as sediment. Some of it will even wash into the lake, essentially, or the sewer, or where, into the main waterway. So ultimately, too, with my experience over the years, is if you beef up the area where the water comes in with rock, but you don't put rock anywhere else, well, everywhere but where the rock over edges where it's not supposed to be time. And that really then gets the edges with rock, and really doing as much rock throughout as you can. And all that is really based on how much money you want to spend, realistically. So, that's a tough one for sure. And that's something I've learned a lot about over the years, because moving rock into a garden isn't easy. It's not something that necessarily anyone can do on their own. So, but I would always recommend that you put as much stone in the garden, particularly on the edges and anywhere around where water is going to come in and or out of the garden.
So help us with the plant selection, because I know you grow plants, and there's so many to choose from. So in our particular zone here in Petoskey, what have you been most successful with?
Well, I mean, Petoskey is technically a zone 5. So you want to aim for zone 5 plants for starters. That is different if you're living down right on the water. That can be, especially with northern exposure, that can, with the wind, it can be more like a zone 3 down there. And maybe if you had some really nice sunny southern spots, you could push to zone 6, but mostly you would want to stay focused on zone 5, 4 or 5 plants for our area. In a lot of ways, most of the edges and the tops of the gardens, you can choose any number of plants that you want, that anyone would choose in their gardens. Choosing native plants is great. And if that's what somebody wants to do, certainly there's a lot of different choices. Like in the picture, you saw the cone flowers, of course. Really anything you want. It's hard for me to sit here and say individual names. I don't know if you want me to necessarily list them all out, because that's just like a list of Latin and blah, blah, blah. But certainly when you get into the basin of the garden, particularly you want to choose for plants based on, like Noah said, how well your drainage is. For starters, you want to make sure that, you do have relatively good drainage. And a lot of places where you would get plants, like for instance, a shout out to Hortec. I'm not trying to advertise for them or anything, but they are a Michigan nursery. And they always list in their website or in their catalog that it's a rain garden plant. And for any well-drained rain garden, that will definitely work just fine. Also, sedges are a really good plant to include in rain gardens because they ultimately are deep rooted, but are a grassy type thing that can tolerate the amount of moisture that you're putting down there. If your garden isn't draining that well and it's retaining water, well, first off, you kind of have a pond, which you want to get rid of. But ultimately, if you do have a little bit of standing water, if it's lingering for a day or so, it should be fine. But you may want to consider getting plants that are very specific to water only. A few that come up to mind is just like irises, or calamus, Acorus calamus. You know, ultimately, I would say whatever plant you choose, make sure you're not going to get a plant that is really aggressive, that's going to take over the garden. And make sure that
Chris, you froze.
Well, Robin, somehow he ended up on mute.
And froze.
Yeah, and froze.
Oh, there we are. He's unfrozen.
He's still muted.
Okay,
yeah, apparently I'm muted. I don't know how that happened.
I think we were right at calamus. When you
Oh,
froze.
at Calamus?
Yeah, you froze right about that.
Okay, well, yeah, no worries. I'll bring it back a little bit. Mostly what I was saying is that make sure to choose for the structure that you're looking for in the garden, because the plants in the bottom of the garden you want to get taller to some degree, because if you have plants around the edges that shroud, you're not going to be able to see the things down in the basin of the garden. So that becomes really important. And then ultimately selecting for different bloom times. When it comes to native plants, there's a lot of cultivars available for most of the gardens that I have done. For instance, like Lindsay's, and for the city, some of the bigger ones. We tend to use cultivars of native plants because the bloom time is longer. The plants are generally have bigger flowers, more bold colors. And in a lot of ways, you know, that really grabs people's attention more and makes them appreciate what they see more. But you can always go pure native if you want. There's a lot of great native plants. That's what the cultivars are based on. You might find that the bloom times are shorter, but ultimately you'll find that they will generally perform better in the area. The cultivars, again, have been cultivated for performance, but not always tested in every area that they're planted. So, and if you really want some good examples of some plants that you can use in a rain garden, you can always go down to along the edges of the Bear River or down to the waterfront. All the native plants that you would want to use are right there all around you in these water areas, and those would be a great way to emulate what you're looking for. Probably want to give a props out to swamp milkweed, butterflies. There's definitely a lot of plants though that you can plant that will attract butterflies. But it's something, the milkweed should always be something that's on the list probably of plants that you're gonna put in your rain garden. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I'm going to throw one question out here because I've been actually working on some of the gardens in Bayview over the years. I think we're on year 6 maybe now. And it looks to me like we need to thin them out. So I guess like any garden,
Mhm.
you need to divide at some point in time.
Yeah, realistically, you do have to treat it like any garden, and ultimately that is going to mean digging the plants up at times, separating them out, pulling out the grasses and the weeds. You may need to, like Noah said, you may need to remulch, or will likely have to remulch, but definitely the moment you disturb the soil anywhere in your garden, then it can grow weeds. So the moment that you're going to do any of that dividing and stuff like that, that's when you want to apply more mulch. And the thing with rock mulch that's great is that it is permanent mulch. If you put enough down and cover an area, it will last for years at a time. And you can always kind of bring it back to the surface with a pitchfork. Where hardwood mulch, we also have to remember it does float. And so if you put it on thick enough, that's great because it will kind of mat down, but ultimately a lot of it will float away if it's not secured. So that's another great, reason to have rocks in there. But can you remind me of your question? Because I'm getting a little carried away.
So, well, there's one in the chat if you wanted to answer it now. Is the name of the nursery? I think you said Horak. I don't
Hortak,
know. Is it Hortak?
TECH.
Okay. Okay.
And you can always come get native plants from me at Wildflowers Nursery in Petoskey.
Okay. All right. I think, Lindsay, we're ready to hear tell us how you got into this.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Noah, for your land recognition. I always like to start off presentations with that, like situating us where we live, right? In the land of the Anishinaabe. So thank you for that. To situate you where I live, my watershed is the Bear River Valley, and all the water goes down to the Bear River and into beautiful Little Traverse Bay. So my incentive to have a rain garden in my own home really started when I just became a homeowner. I bought a small, tiny fixer-upper on Emmett Street back in 2015. And in combination with a contractor friend and my family, we remodeled the whole house. It's 725 square feet, and took it down to the studs and remodeled the whole home. And by the time we had finished with our labors, I moved into my home in February of 2016. And so within that first year, I was looking at the front of my home, which faces Emmett Street, and the back of my home, which faces towards the Bear River Valley and Buckley Avenue and the rolling hills down to the Bear River Valley. So the front of my house was a train wreck. It was absolutely, I live really high and dry on top of a very sandy, loamy soil. So perfect for drainage, but they had installed probably like railroad ties, the berm, and tried to keep, the material from ending up in our watershed. And so I knew that any erosion that was happening on my piece of property and how water flows, I wanted to create permeable surfaces. I knew that in my brain of brains that was the right thing to do. And I also wanted to create a rain garden in the front of my home because of its very public facing on Emmett Street. It's like the flow of traffic on the south to go south out of our community and up towards Meyer. And so it's a very public place with lots of traffic. So I thought that it might be a good possible good location for residential demonstration. And so at the time, Petoskey Harbor Springs Area Community Foundation had given a grant to Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council to help provide grants for homeowners, I guess potentially business owners as well, if they would consider investing in a rain garden in their home. So a big part of the incentive and my ability to do that was a little subsidy and a little grant. So I just applied for it and was thrilled to have received the grant. So that was very helpful in the cost of designing the rain garden, which my friend Jason Brabs, formerly of North by Nature Landscaping, and now he's an independent consultant. And so he'll be providing these services to our greater community as well. And he's a good old friend of mine. We went to college together. So I had him just kind of design that flow, a tiered system of how when water falls, not just from my roof line, but in general from the sky, and then being able to kind of, especially in big inundations, big rainstorms, just to be able to kind of watch that flow of water out into the rain garden and pooling in different areas where it could be captured if we were having a heavy rain event. So the design portion was my friend Jason, and he didn't charge me anything for that. And then I contracted with Chris Leeson for the plant selection and the actual installation. I had somebody also do the rock work on my front and side of my driveway. At the time, I really wanted to do a permeable surface in my driveway. It was just like gravel and sand and very hard compacted. So I got some quotes together, and I really, really, really wanted to do permeable pavers, but it was very cost prohibitive. So that really wasn't an option for me at the time. I ended up having to go with pavement, unfortunately, because that was what I could afford at the time. I do have intentions of in the future, because pavement doesn't last forever, but I would love to be able to afford to install permeable pavers, or maybe another kind of pea gravel surface, something that would be permeable. Because I understand Tippecanoe Watershed Council several years ago put out a really excellent book about our watershed and what homeowners and shoreline owners can do to plant and create permeable surfaces for their homes and landscaping. And especially if you live adjacent to a lake, or like in my context, I live in the Bear River Valley. So I understand that when it rains, that our water washes into our storm drains. And I've actually seen where the storm drains in Petoskey empty into the Bear River. So my friend or former employee at Tippecanoe Watershed Council, Jen Buchanan, and I would sometimes call each other like, there's a big inundation. Let's go down to the Bear River and see what it looks like totally nerding out on the flow of water, right? And when you do see what's going into those storm drains and coming out into the Bear River, you're like, whoa, we got a lot of work to do about educating people about that we all live in this watershed, and it's going to end up in Little Traverse Bay. And what does that look like at the Bear River at the mouth right there? How does that affect fish? And what does it mean to have lots of sediment in our water? And how does that affect the whole cycle of life? So as a homeowner, I was thrilled to have a subsidy to help me install my rain garden. The plant selection was really fun because I was completely a bit of a newbie to that. I knew that I wanted to do native plantings. And at the time, I don't think a lot of people were talking about that. And you'd go to a greenhouse like Johansson's out on Pickerel Lake Road, and he was like, oh, this native plant thing is a fad. And I'd be like, no, I don't really think it's a fad, but just learning about what the best plant selection is. And of course you want to have pretty flowering stuff that looks as blooming in the spring, and then something that would carry through into the summer and fall. So I just let the experts kind of guide me, Chris and Jason, in the plant selection, because I was just open to the suggestions, because it's an experiment. It's a demonstration garden. So and I have plants that I've learned to really like in my rain garden. And we did the installation of piping in the garden itself, and then hardscaped with a lot of that pea gravel. And I'm sure there's a very specific name to what that's called. Chris, you'll have to remind me what kind of rock or stone that you're looking for the top dressing So sand underneath, and I wanted to use compost because I'm a composter and, but it really wasn't necessary in that context because you want to have drainage. And so compost can be an amender and you can top dress and do those things. But when you have rock on top of that, you don't really need to amend your soils with compost. So yeah, thank you. This is a picture of my garden. So a lot of, Chris, you're probably a better, more articulate, and you can totally impress us with all of your knowledge of Latin. But one of the favorite plants that I have in my garden, I'm a big fan of Rudbeckia or the brown-eyed Susan. I love Echinacea. But that marshmallow, is that what it's called, Chris? That creeper that has a beautiful purple or pink flower. That is really lovely. And I would love to see more of that in my garden.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that's a globe mallow. I honestly have only had partial results with that. They're like in your yard, it seems to be fine. In a couple other places it's survived, but in a lot of places I've planted it and even replanted it, it just doesn't survive. And I think, again, that comes down to that northern exposure versus you're kind of on the other side of the hill on the lake there with that great southern exposure. So, you know, it's a little bit warmer in your area. I'm glad that's doing well. But
yeah, and this is actually, my rain garden faces the east, so I get a lot of that morning sun, and it gets quite hot, especially in the summertime. So we're getting a lot of sun in that area, as opposed to like the backside of my house would be facing the west. So I receive the sunrise in the morning from the morning sun there in the front. And then obviously the south side would be the south side facing like Michigan Maple Block side, and then around to the back and the west. So yeah, I don't know. Some plants have been very successful. And what is that other creeping material right there that's like over the rocks in the front, Chris? Is that, I forget what that plant is called. That's also very lovely and blooms very early in the season.
yep, that's Phlox subulata. That's a cultivar of a native species, but really is pretty close to the species itself. Yeah, and that's a really, you know, your garden is really unique in a way that it's basically a terrace wall. And it's not a giant swale, but we're running the water behind the wall and down it. And so that, again, when it comes to plant selection, that gives you an opportunity to use something on those edges that's a little bit smaller and creeps over the wall like that. That phlox is great for any garden along the edges, but not something you'd want to put down in the water. One, because it wouldn't like that. Obviously, it likes to be up on the rocks.
Yeah.
But also, it would just get lost down there. You'd never see it.
So I have one question for Lindsay. We have a minute left. It's always tempting to think you need to water your rain garden. I know that happened to me in Bayview, and you know, and you and I have talked about this before. Do you ever water your garden, or do you
I've never watered my garden? I don't even have irrigation. Like I have a hose. I have a hose, but it's in the back of the house, and I don't have a hose that extends to the front. So I've never irrigated anything. I have had opportunities to watch big inundations, and the engineering of that rain garden is working really well. It's fun to see the water move and pool and retain right there on the property.
Cool.
And I think moving forward, just to wrap it up, there are things that I'd like to do. I believe my rain garden is in its 5th year. I think I started in 2018. So here we are in the spring of 2023. And there are certain things that I'd like to do moving forward. I'd like to introduce some different plants and maybe move some things around that are in the back of the rain garden to other parts of like the side of my house. Sometimes they've gotten really, really tall. I did have to battle horsetail for a little while. And Chris and I kind of went back and forth, and he's like, Lindsay, you really need to eradicate this or it's going to take over your garden. I'm like, but can I just like be pulling weeds? And he's like, sure, you can be pulling weeds all the time. And that if you want to make that as your maintenance plan, they since have kind of, I don't really see that much horsetail anymore in my garden. And I know that they're ancient plants and they're really important and they have all kinds of medicinal properties. But when you're trying to establish something that's more delicate, you need to give it the space to be able to thrive, because some of those other plants will just like take over and be more aggressive. So I've had to learn to like what plants you want to incentivize to grow, you need to give them the space to do so because they're kind of sensitive. So I love things like little blue stem and big blue stem, and I'm open to, I also share and divide. So Pam, you were talking about like the Bayview gardens are a little overgrown. That would be an awesome opportunity to be able to maybe take some plants out and share them amongst ourselves. I don't know if that's an idea, and I'm more than willing to share some of the plants that I have in my garden that could be transplanted to other places. So opportunities for each one to teach one and to share in our bounties of our rain gardens.
All right, we'll have eBay for rain plants in Petoskey. Okay, that was great, Lindsay. Thank you very much.
Thank
And I
you.
think we're going to turn it over now to Marcia, and we have a couple questions in the chat.
We'll start with Lindsay since she was talking anyway. Did you find you could do anything yourself in making the rain garden? And how did you get rid of the horsetail?
Thanks. Did I find that I could do anything myself in making the rain garden? No, but my friend Jason, like he spends a lot of time with me and at my house. And so he'll make suggestions of things that I can do. And the horsetail, I literally would spend time early in the spring plucking the horsetail and putting it in a bucket. And now I can kind of live with it because the rest of the plants have had time to establish themselves. So there's no threat of something more aggressive kind of taking over that space. So I didn't get rid of it. I just learned to live with it and mitigate it a little bit in the initial stages so that other plants that are more sensitive could thrive.
Get it under control.
Yes.
All right, Noah, some questions for you. What's the indirect runoff called again? It's probably a shorter question.
I guess I'm not quite sure what that's referring to. So there's this stormwater runoff is just what we generally call all the water that's flowing off of our hard impervious surfaces. Is that what we're after here?
Chris, Noah, that was my question. And it was the 3-letter acronym, and I didn't write it down and I wanted to remember what it was. And it included all of the things that run off that's not directly.
Right, that's a non-point source pollution is what we call it, or NPS was the 3-letter acronym. So basically that means like, point source is like where you have like a factory or some one specific thing where you can kind of look like, okay, here's the pipe, here's where the pollution is coming from. Whereas non-point source is like more diffuse. So it's like, it's not like the pollution is coming from one spot. It's coming from your yard. It's coming from my yard. It's coming from the whole neighborhood, and it's being concentrated into our stormwater system and then coming out of the pipe and entering the water that way. Or maybe it's flowing directly over land into our waters. So that's what the non-point source pollution is referring to.
And you said garden plants take up excess nutrients. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah,
what-
so
Along with that is what becomes of the heavy metals that might be caught in a rain garden. So the excess nutrients explain, and the heavy metals that might be caught.
yeah, so the plants taking up nutrients, I mean, that's kind of what they do for their life. They are, to help them grow, they need nutrients that they get out of the soil. So basically when the runoff that's entering the rain garden can be carrying some of those nutrients, and the plants will use those to fuel their growth. So that's how they get removed from the soil. In terms of the heavy metals, the one I'm most familiar with is lead. So in terms of that, the lead doesn't get removed per se from the soil, but when lead is exposed to organic matter that's in the soil, so that's created from some of the like leaf litter that falls on the soil. It's created by plant roots when they die and decompose. They're creating organic matter in the soil, and a lot of those little molecules of the organic matter have different reactive sites on their surface that latch onto the lead, and they convert it into forms that are what we call they're not bioavailable. So it's a form that is not toxic to people or animals because it's been transformed in such a way that it's not a toxic form anymore.
Well, you mentioned the rain garden under construction at Spoon Foods. I don't know.
I'm listening. I'm
Okay.
listening.
Chris,
What's up? The garden at Spoon Foods?
right.
Yeah. What do you want to know about it?
Whatever you have to tell us.
Well, I mean, it's under construction right now. It's definitely the biggest rain garden that I've done. It takes runoff from their entire new building and a huge portion of their parking lot, and a lot even from the road. I can tell you right now we've installed probably 70 yards of topsoil and are going to come in and install about 70 yards of sand and probably put half that amount in rock in there. And you can come see it at any time. You can come hang out with us over the next couple of weeks while we're working down there. Give us a break.
What kind of water problem was it before this excavation?
There wasn't necessarily a water problem. It is required for them in their building to direct that water towards the ditch that was there. And basically, Spoon Foods said, well, we can have a grassy ditch that somebody has to mow, every couple weeks, or we can invest in making it an actual garden. So they, went with the latter.
Cool.
But it's big. It's really big. So
Check it out.
unbelievably big. You'll have to see it to believe it.
Susan Stout, would you like to say a few words about your garden? Susan, is Susan here?
Yeah, she was on mute and she does have one of the homes that I have pictures of, and I didn't know if she wanted to say anything or not. So.
Somebody asked where the Spoon Foods rain garden is, Chris.
So that's at their new manufacturing building and storage facility building that is on River Road in Petoskey, just past the old high school football field and track field, just as you turn left onto River Road there.
Is it pretty visible from the road?
Yeah, it's right along the road. Yep.
Okay. Have to take note when we go by.
I had a question. Chris, do you know where you source the topsoil for American Spoon Foods garden from?
Well, I just get all of that through Harbor Design.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because, not only sourcing, but how are you going to get it to where it needs to go? They're able to deliver it and stuff. So where they get it, I am not totally sure.
I think it's probably Harbor Springs Excavating because they're right down the road from them on West.
They might get it from them.
Yeah.
But you know what? I was just talking to one of their old drivers this morning, and he was saying they were getting it from somewhere in Harbor Springs north, further north. So
Maybe.
sometimes, and you can get it from the transfer station.
But it's not just topsoil, it's compost.
You guys
Biologically
don't have just topsoil there?
No, we don't have any topsoil. We make compost from yard waste and food scraps.
All right.
I did have a question. It didn't get mentioned this time, but I know that Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council and Emmett County Recycling in the past have done rain barrel and compost bin sales together. And I do know that rain barrels are also another part of a potential residential solution for capturing roof water, and then the rain chains and those kind of things as well. So I don't happen to have a rain barrel, but I also don't have what is the thing? I'm so
Gutters.
sorry. On your house that captures the rainwater.
Eaves.
Yeah,
Eaves.
gutters. Mhm.
Or
Gutters, yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Gutters.
So I don't have that infrastructure, but that would be another possible addition to my rain garden and making sure I'm capturing all the water from around my property.
So I have a question about rain barrels. Our house backs up to another building that has a huge roof, and we get a lot of water runoff from that roof. And we can't have the water stay there because it will go into our basement. It's too close to the house. It's probably only a 7-8 foot between the two buildings. A water barrel there that we could use that water to water other things. I don't know if that would be a spot for that, or if it's still, you have to worry about when you get too much in it, that it's just going to pool there and run in our basement. I don't know. We're still trying to solve that problem there with our neighbor's big business roof.
Yeah.
Okay, I think just to wrap up, I'm going to give you all a little bit of a preview on some of the gardens that you'll be able to see. I would say wait until maybe even July. I mean, you don't have to wait. These are gardens you're going to drive by and probably will see. And the ones that I've picked to be part of the tour are, you can see from the curb, and they're all different kinds. I'm going to start, the first one is the Tip of the Mitt with those beautiful birch trees. This garden was just redone. It seems like it was last year, but maybe it was the year before. So it had been there for quite a while, and they felt it needed a refresh. And when they refreshed it, they added a lot of stone. So in other words, it was just totally plants. And now this is the refreshed look. There's one angle at it. It's a very large garden, very pretty. And why wouldn't the Tip of the Mitt be our source, right? So they have a rain garden. And right around the corner, and this is one I didn't really know was there. I don't know why, but it's a St. Francis Credit Union.
Yeah.
Look at those beautiful flowers.
That's my favorite rain garden in town. I ride by that on the bike path every day. Like how Chris and I would probably traverse to go into town. That's like right by our path of our daily commutes on our bicicletas.
I have not had a chance to talk to whoever maintains it, and I have no idea who maintains it. That's something I want to find out this summer, because it's just gorgeous. This is a new garden at First Pres.
Ma'am, I maintain that garden, just FYI.
Okay, small world. This is one at First Pres. Honest to God, I saw them putting this garden in. I swear it was sleeting. It was in October. It was so cold. I thought to myself, this is not going to work. Anyway, they redid their exterior during COVID, and then they had the perfect, right there on Mitchell Street at Division, they had the perfect spot to capture water. And yes, they put this in. A lady by the name of Jane Dene, who actually has some beautiful rain gardens at her home down near the lake, was spearheaded this for the church, and they have a beautiful little prayer pole there in their garden. It's a fairly new garden. I want to say now it might be in its 3rd season. And this is another angle of that garden. Okay, and then this is a home.
Mary Clinton's house.
No, it isn't actually.
No, that's
Mary,
okay. Okay.
Mary has native garden, not technically a rain garden, and this
Okay.
one is definitely a rain garden, capturing the water on that hill, of which, you know, we know they're everywhere in town.
That's on the corner of Howard and Fulton, I think.
You're correct. Yeah. And this is another garden. This one, I believe, is Grove and Lockwood. And this one's more natural, if you will. Okay. You know, maybe it's not the perfect garden, and who, you know, how can you? But it's a perfect solution and easy to maintain, a great cultivator garden. Again, there's just so many to pick from. There's Lindsay's, which we've seen. Here's another garden. It's small and colorful. I can see some irises in there. You know, it's always a challenge for me to know that something's going to bloom and be colorful. And the previous one I showed you isn't quite as colorful, but it's still serving all the purposes you would hope for. This is a private home that I hope you'll all be able to see on Grand Avenue as you go up towards Winter Park off of Arlington. This is just a piece of these homeowners' garden. They're all around the back. They actually created and enhanced the creek that was on their property to create even more water flow. And again, that's just one piece of their garden. Here's another angle looking towards the bay on Grand Avenue towards Arlington. The homeowners are very welcoming if people stop by, and they're almost always working in their yard. And this last one that I put in is at Bayview. Okay, I picked the perfect time with all the beautiful colors there. This is one of the gardens that I said it's probably at a point where it needs a refresh. I have taken some of the black-eyed Susans out, and they didn't necessarily like the place I put them. So I don't know. Maybe I did it at the wrong time of year. And then this is another angle of that garden. So in Bayview, if the water would not be captured by this garden, it'd be down the hill onto 31, because that's the next down. This is right at as you go over that walking bridge. And there's actually 4 rain gardens in that immediate area. And this is another one that's right alongside the library. So anyway, that's our little visual walking tour, and the information is going to be available and sent to all the participants. It'll be online on our website, and I hope you will take the opportunity to stop and look more closely at some of these. Again, it'll probably be more fun to wait until like July, and they'll be thriving all through September.
Can I mention that there's also a public demonstration rain garden at the corner of Kalamazoo Avenue and Sunset Court across from Ottawa School? That would be a good example of the municipality creating rain gardens. I mean, I think they worked with Tippecanoe Watershed Council on the design of that. So that's an example of a municipal rain garden demonstration, as well as the new project at Solanas Beach at the waterfront.
Oh, okay.
What's that address, Lindsay?
It's the corner of Sunset Court and Kalamazoo Avenue. So when they reconstructed Kalamazoo Avenue and added sidewalks and did the utilities undergrounding, I think it was 2018, they partnered with Tippecanoe Watershed Council to do a demonstration garden right on the corner of Sunset Court and Kalamazoo. So you can see that this year.
Right, it is on our list. It's 913 on Sunset. I didn't give you addresses today, but you'll actually have addresses and Google Map links to the locations.
That's another one that Chris installed, I believe. So
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yes, it really is.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it back to Robin, I think. Unless there's any other questions that we haven't answered.
All right, thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. Thank you, panelists. This was really informative. I think we've all learned a lot about rain gardens. For me personally, I had no idea there were so many in town. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. So again, thank you for taking the time. This concludes our public forum. I have one more announcement before everybody signs off. Our next event is this Saturday, May 13th. We're hosting, along with the city of Petoskey, an Arbor Day celebration at the Petoskey Winter Sports Park from 1 to 4 p.m. There's lots of activities showcasing trees and their role in the environment. We're going to have pine cone bird feeder making stations. Crooked Tree Art Center has an art station. There's a scavenger hunt for kids. For adults, there's tree giveaways, a tree climbing demonstration, and Eric Hemingway with the Little Traverse Bay Band will conduct a guided nature tour walk showcasing native plants and more. It's supposed to be good weather on Saturday, so come out with the kids and the grandkids for a fun afternoon. And again, this is all due to the wonderful members of our Environment and Natural Resources Committee. They have planned this, so we hope to see all of you there. All right, thanks again for attending. We're going to ask all members to stay on as others sign off and get on with their evening.
Thanks for having us. We'll
Bye.
see you at the Arbor Day.
Yay!
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Night.